So then I would like to give the floor to Michael Kloos from University of Aachen to say something. The topic is on case studies.
Geht es einfach weiter?
Genau.
Und das ist der Pointer davon?
Genau.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and sorry for messing up your schedule. I refer this contribution a little bit to the contribution I made to the book, which is my contribution goes about heritage impact assessment because I'm busy with that subject since several years. I will show you some examples, some case studies on that, and actually the background of this contribution is whether heritage impact assessments can support sustainability or not. If we talk about sustainability, I think it is clear that since at least 1992 it is actually an overall concept, a worldwide concept, where nearly all countries have obliged themselves to. So it should be something actually which is actually already there. What is interesting is that UNESCO started in recent years also to develop culture as a notion or as a fourth column for sustainability. And this is actually also a focus point in my contribution because it's about World Heritage Sites, which is about culture naturally, of course. But if we talk about sustainability in World Heritage Sites, we also have to talk about questions like these. This is Vienna. Vienna is a very large World Heritage Site. This is the ancient city of Vienna. The bluish line is the buffer zone. And Vienna actually is a city of 2.2 million inhabitants, much smaller than several Indian cities, of course, but in European scale it's a large city and it's still growing. And this circle here shows actually a question which is at the moment there. There's a high-rise plan, high-rise buildings which is about to build here in the World Heritage area. And what you can see here is basically the consequence, or would be the consequence. This is actually a Baroque sightline, and the city silhouette, of course, would be transformed by these plans. But this is not the first time that Vienna struggles with these kind of questions. This was another question which was actually to be discussed in the year 2005, Wien Mitte, a project which nearly brought Vienna on the list of World Heritage in danger. But Vienna is not only the only city, of course, but I just want to show you that these larger sites, the complex ones, often actually urban sites in urban agglomerations produce these kinds of questions because it's nearly naturally that a city wants to develop itself. At the same time, of course, it has to preserve its heritage. And this is not easy. And this is a picture from Warsaw, actually. This is also a World Heritage Site. It doesn't look like that. It's from the 18th century, this picture. But this is actually how Warsaw looks today. So, and this goes very fast. This actually all happened in the last 10 years. So, this is more or less the focus of this contribution here. And I just want to focus on the question whether heritage impact assessments can contribute to sustainability in case of these questions. I think you all know the case of Dresden, and I will just will compress it very much on the question what the heritage impact assessment did in this case, or what it not did. Then I will go to Istanbul. This is Istanbul already, and then I will go to Cologne in order to discuss this question with you. And actually, I brought various answers with me. No, yes, and perhaps. So I could actually close down my contribution right now, but I will express this a bit more in detail. I think you all know the case of Dresden, that it was inscribed in 2004 as a cultural landscape. This is the whole cultural landscape. This is just a part of it, a section. Dresden was inter alia inscribed for these kind of visual connections in this river valley, because there are all kinds of castles. So an important part of the OUV actually is these visual connections, which have their center point at the Frauenkirche, the city of the ancient lady. And there were plans, of course, to build a bridge here at this part. And the question we were asked was whether this bridge basically would perhaps harm the OUV. This was a traffic thoroughfare of a length of 1.9 kilometers. This is a visualization. So actually our system is to do heritage impact assessments, is to show actually what's going to happen in order to inform everybody about it. And this is one of our visualizations. And you see, of course, that is a major transformation in this site. And this is actually this center point of these sightlines here, the Frauenkirche. And this is actually how the same vista looked in the 1930s. So basically our impression was, especially if you look from the bottom, from the valley, that these sightlines are interrupted, at least at certain points of the valley. So we came to the conclusion to recommend that it would be better to revise these plans and to think about an alternative solution. But as you know, this was not the case. The bridge was built, and Dresden was withdrawn from the World Heritage List after a long discussion in the year 2009. What I find, the item is here now, what did the Heritage Impact Assessment, or what could it contribute? And of course, this is a clear no case. We couldn't contribute to sustainability in that question. And this was for two basic reasons. Actually, we didn't have enough time for this research. We only were requested 6 weeks before actually the tendering procedure would be started to come up with this research. And the other question was the lack of communication. So there was a clear lack of communication, but not only about this case, about this bridge. Also, when Dresden area was nominated already, because it's a very complex site, there was also not enough communication, what that actually means for the development of the city, and how actually a vision could be developed together with the World Heritage cultural landscape. And that basically, these problems, these deficits in the nomination actually also overshaded this case. There were several several questions there, but even high-ranking politicians actually didn't communicate well with high-ranking representatives of the UNESCO and advisory bodies. So this was a very crucial problem in this case. And because we had a very, very limited time frame, we couldn't also come up with alternatives. So we just basically ended up with a study which basically said we should do something else, but we couldn't develop an alternative solution. So more or less, the representatives of Dresden were left alone with this negative result without a way out, more or less. So that is why lack of time was really a crucial problem there. I take you now to a case which has quite some similarities to Dresden in Istanbul. It's also about a bridge. This is Istanbul, the historic peninsula, and these are the various World Heritage sites in there. Of course, most people of you know that. Again, this is this historic peninsula. And the question in Istanbul was whether at this place a new bridge could be built there. This is the so-called Golden Horn Metro Crossing Bridge. This is a part of the World Heritage. This is Suleymaniye Mosque. It's one of the most famous mosques, and it's in Istanbul, and it's a very important part of the city silhouette. And as you see here, the bridge was about to be built just right at the bottom of this mosque. I come back to that, but I will show you a bit of the history, a bit of our research, just some impressions about it. This is Istanbul around 1900. It actually developed itself from three different cores. Istanbul is the only European city which has an Asian part. This is Asia, and a European part. And it basically has two European cores and an Asian core. But if you look at the city today, we see that it's a city basically nobody knows exactly how much inhabitants Istanbul has. Around 50 million. It changes very, very fast. And of course, the city struggles with congestion problems. There's a very limited concept of public transport there up to now. And this is basically the 1900 picture, and this is how the city looks today. So of course, has the city somehow to solve these questions, and basically crucial ways to solve it is to build a tunnel between the Asian and the European part. This tunnel is ready meanwhile. But we had actually to deal with this question here. This is a new metro line which is about to connect the two European parts of the city. And of course it's clear that a public transport line in these kind of conditions is really needed in the city. When we were involved in the study, this part of the metro line was already ready. So this was already actually in action. This one was under construction. It was also ready, but and this bridge actually was just missing. So it was just about this bridge basically to get this transport connection working. All the other parts were ready. And then we came to the site, looked at this. So this is the metro line. This is basically the Golden Horn, so the former harbor of the Istanbul. And large parts of the city, of the bridge, were already there, especially the foundations, which were 100 meters deep, were already built. This is a decision. There are various decisions of the UNESCO and its advisory bodies that the bridge design, which was intended to be built there, would probably disturb the silhouette, especially of Suleymaniye Mosque, especially since the pylons here would basically compete with the minarets of the mosque. So there was a question of visual integrity about this, and you see here that these bridge plans were quite complicated also to be built. The foundations were very, very deep. It was a very, very complicated area, and there was no alternative to build a bridge. It was not possible to build a tunnel, so there has to be built a bridge. So this was a difficult case because on the one hand, of course, this metro line is needed for the sustainable development of the city, but the other question is how to deal with the sustainable development of Istanbul's cultural heritage. So in this, of course, you might grasp that it's difficult also for people coming from the outside to evaluate these kind of cases, but most of the cases we deal with are similar to that. When you evaluate, you always should start at the OUV, and you can see here, I compress this very, very short, the Suleymaniye Mosque is a very, very important part of the OUV of Istanbul's inscription, also in terms of visual integrity. So it was clear that there was actually a question here, also because these mosques, this is a picture from the 19th century, but this is a picture from today, play an extremely important role in the city's silhouette. There were also always bridges over the Golden Horn. This is an old bridge, but these were floating bridges in fact. So this is also Suleymaniye Mosque. There was this floating bridge, which were much lower basically. And it is not possible anymore to build these kind of bridges. And the effect actually you can see here is this, that this vista, also this historic vista, would be blocked, of course, because this was a quite massive bridge with also a metro stop on it. So when we came to this case, it was even more complicated in the case of Dresden, but since we quite learned some lessons from Dresden, we said, okay, we try another way to solve this question. We started to develop a working process, and the first step of our working process was to come up with a first report on this case. And as you might imagine, we came to a negative conclusion, but we used this first report to involve all local stakeholders and to inform them that there was really an item to be solved there. And afterwards we started the real working process on the heritage impact assessment, which we did with the help of a steering committee, experts, international experts, and also with local stakeholders. So basically we formed a working team because we knew we had to change something because there was really a problem to be solved there. And that worked basically quite well. So the plan was to have several working meetings and then to inform the committee and the advisory body what's going to happen. One of our experts was a very well-known German structural engineer, and he actually helped us to change this bridge, and he came up with a lot of alternatives. So he showed actually how this bridge could be planned in a less obtrusive way. So I just pushed through these. So there were all kinds of different alternatives. And in the end, we started of this working process. We started basically also to visualize this bridge and to show what had happened in this during this working process. And if you compare this a little bit, basically there was quite a little bit of effort, but this is basically the result we presented to the World Heritage Committee. But the message was in general that the case is not solved yet, but there was at least the will, also the willingness of the local stakeholders to do something about it. And that is actually a great difference to the case of Dresden, because the discussion process at least was stimulated due to this process. So we could actually avoid a conflict like in Dresden, but also we couldn't avoid that the bridge was built. If you come to Istanbul nowadays, I still find it quite obtrusive, so the case is not really solved. It was rather solved in a political manner. So I would call this Istanbul case a perhaps case. So in certain manner there was an improvement done, in other important ways of thinking not. I come now to the last case study, which is Cologne, and I think you all know Cologne. It's nearby here. Cologne Cathedral is quite famous. It was inscribed in 1996. A quite old World Heritage Site, to call it like that. This is Cologne Cathedral, and there were high-rise plans a couple of years ago on the opposite side of the Rhine. So there was a high-rise scheme developed, and actually UNESCO and its advisory bodies doubted that this basically would be an efficient contribution to the World Heritage. Again, this is one of our visualizations, and we came to the conclusion basically that these high-rise buildings also should be revised, because we had very much the impression that Cologne Cathedral is a very symbol in the city silhouette of Cologne, and it shouldn't be actually become counterparted by this high-rise development. So we came up with two different recommendations. The first recommendation was to enlarge the buffer zone, also to enclose the right-hand side of the Rhine into the buffer zone of Cologne Cathedral. So that was one recommendation. And then the discussion process started, and after several years, make it very, very short, we came to the opportunity to start a working process with stakeholders, with citizens from Cologne, but also with experts from Cologne, and also with several architectural offices. And we started to work on alternatives on this high-rise scheme. And basically this is the outcome of the study. So it's basically a new urban structure which is much lower, but far more compressed in a way. So this is how it looks like today. And what is quite interesting about this case, that it's also in economical terms, it's much more efficient than the original scheme. So basically it's a solution which comes to a certain interference between economical, cultural, and also ecological affairs. So I find this quite an interesting case, because the discussion about culture and cultural heritage basically stimulated a quite, at least a better development than it was. So Cologne is a bit a yes case in this contribution. So if you talk about sustainability, and I also talked a lot about it, we should also define a bit, in my opinion at least, what sustainability is, and I will still find this the best description so far, the description of the Bundland report, which belongs actually, or builds up on a contract of various generations. So just meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. But if we look into this notion a bit closer, I think sustainability is very much a notion which goes about communication. Because actually we don't know exactly what it is. We have to define it in every case from new on. So that is of course a bit exhausting. But communication is actually an indispensable precondition for the development of sustainable concepts. And Cologne is actually a perfect case which shows that there was a very special solution actually found, and there's no other case actually which shows a similar solution. But my opinion is that sustainability means to design tailor-made solutions for certain questions. So basically, communication means also very often, in our cases, we have difficulties between communication between local stakeholders, national ones, and international ones. That is very, very complicated to get this solved. So very often we work as kind of translators, we translate decisions of UNESCO to local stakeholders and so forth. But to get this sustainable thing going, I think this is actually a crucial thing, and it should start, or it should be started during the nomination. If the site is inscribed, it's too late in my opinion. The vision for sustainability has to be there before inscription. 3 short lessons concerning heritage impact assessments. Our experience shows that you should use them in time. If you are too late with it, actually you are also more or less, in nearly all cases, we were also too late to come up with tailor-made concepts. We also try always to use heritage impact assessments as an active tool to offer solutions, not to show problems, to offer solutions. That is also very important, in my opinion. And we have quite good experience to use them together with communication strategies. because otherwise the study itself is not enough. You need to communicate the study also during the working process to local stakeholders. So that was a bit the contribution of mine for your seminar. Thank you very much.